It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for England. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor, and today we are updating England's squad for the 2022 World Cup.
Yes, we've done a podcast on the groups, which took a close look at England's team, as well as player mediacasts, which went through each player, each of the candidates for making the final squad. And that ended with a prediction of starters.
So this mediacast is an addendum to that. In other words, we won't be repeating all of that information, but we'll simply be adding on to it. It's not necessary to listen to that previous version, but the conclusion we draw here are both based on that information and explained in more detail there. So we recommend the full player podcast, but if we have time, we are also hoping to release a player version focused solely on the final squad, which would give the bios of just those 26 players.
Right. Well, the final squad has been released, and for only about half the teams, actually, a preliminary squad too. England's case, it was just the final squad. So today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions during the full podcast. So we're going to list the name of the candidates here again, and then announce who made the preliminary, and then then announce who made the final squad in England's case.
So as we guessed, most squads had a few surprises, players who didn't make it, and new or unexpected players who did. So we'll go over those players and summarize them again at the end.
Yes, and we'll also discuss whether the selections and the games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and on the team's progress. So maybe before we begin, I have to say something about your shirt, Connor. Wales shirt for the England podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, especially with them being in the same group. You may think it's blatantly antagonistic, and maybe it is, but I will promise to be unbiased during the podcast.
All right. Well, I have. I'm more on topic. I have a shirt from the 1958 World Cup. It's just a plain white shirt. With a splash of red underneath. It's actually a different shirt. Back then, shirts were made of wood, so this is a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, this is just a lie. I'm just making all of this up. It's my lack of shirts, Connor, that I'm trying to cover up.
Yeah, well, plain white isn't bad.
All right. Well, let's begin by looking at the formations. We're really focused on the September friendlies here, the only games that they've played since June 2022. But we'll just take a look at a bigger picture, starting with the Euro Cup, where they played 7 games, their World Cup qualifying, a couple of friendlies in there, and then the Nations League games, which were in June and September. So any observations there, Connor?
Well, England really do use a lot of different formations. Sometimes 1 up top, sometimes 3 at the back, sometimes 4. In the most recent friendlies, England used a 3-2-2-2-1 system, which they actually used in one of their Euro Cup games and in a couple games of World Cup qualifying. So it's not unprecedented, but I guess the main conclusion is England don't really seem settled, but perhaps the fact that they use this 3-2-2-2-1 in both their recent friendlies suggests that they could start with something similar to that.
Yeah, we have about 50-50 between 4 at the back versus 3 at the back. What's your view on that? Do you think they have a preference there?
I'm not sure, and I guess I perhaps need to do more detailed analysis to see if they're using it against particular opponents. Yeah, like I said, they just, like you said, 50-50, they kind of move around a lot. So I think perhaps in the World Cup, we'll see different formations as we did in the Euro Cup, where various formations were tried out.
Yeah, and up top, we see most of the time it's 1 at the top. So that's obviously Harry Kane. But sometimes a 4-3-3 formation with 2 outside forwards. What do you think?
Yeah, and some formations have kind of a three behind the striker, which gives a role for a central attacking midfielder, and other positions exclude that position. So yeah, I'm not sure really what we'll see kind of on for England's opening game.
Yeah, it makes the analysis a little more difficult because, yeah, we're not sure if it's going to be 3 or 4 at the back or 1 or 3 at the top. So we'll have to kind of take that into account as we're going through the positions here. But let's move on and to the squad, and we'll begin by just talking about the manager.
Yeah, Gareth Southgate. He's been the manager since 2016 and was a former player for England as well, of course.
That's right, and obviously a player who made the squad. Connor literally made the squad, actually. Okay, goalkeepers. We'll begin just by going through the names and their likelihood, or the likelihood we gave them in the main podcast of making the squad. Connor's going to take us through that, and then I'll go through and announce which ones made it.
Yeah, so we had one definite candidate. That was Everton's Jordan Pickford. We had 2 likely candidates, Nick Pope of Newcastle and Arsenal's Aaron Ramsdale. We had one possible candidate in Sam Johnston, who's a backup for Crystal Palace. And then 2 possible but unlikely, Tottenham's Fraser Forster and on loan at Nottingham Forest keeper Dean Henderson.
Right, and I'm going to begin by simplifying our task by getting rid of the ones that didn't make it. So the possible but unlikelies, Fraser Forster and Dean Henderson, were not selected. And the possible candidate, Sam Johnson, also not selected. So we're left with, well, basically the 3 who made it then. Jordan Pickford selected, Nick Pope, and Aaron Ramsdale. So at the end of the podcast, we're going to come back to this and talk about who we think is a starter. But I'm actually going to summarize just by saying a brief summary of the position as it's gone, and particularly who played the September game. So actually, Pickford only played 7 of the 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but his starting position was never in much doubt, at least through that period. All 3 candidates, though, including Sam Johnson, got a start. Sam Johnson not making the squad. However, the June Nations League game saw something of a challenge from Ramsdale, who started 2 of the 4. And actually that continued into September, the September Nations League games, where Pope played both. Does that surprise you, Connor?
Yeah, a little bit, and more kind of a little bit jumping around a bit more. But I think Gareth Southgate, he tends to go by some of his stalwart players. So I don't think it's a real threat to Jordan Pickford, who's kind of been the number 1 for most of Southgate's time. But yeah, it does, I guess, leave some doubt in the mind as to who could start the first game.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we will talk about that in more detail at the end. And meanwhile, move on to defenders. So who do we have for central defenders?
Yeah, we actually didn't identify any definite candidates, but we did identify 3 likely candidates. That was Harry Maguire of Man United, Man City's John Stones, and Everton's Connor Cody. And then for possible candidates, we had 4, Tyrone Mings, Ben White of Arsenal, Fiacco Tomori with AC Milan, and Crystal Palace's Mark Gahey.
That's right. Okay, well, I'll tell you who made it. We'll delete the ones who didn't. Tyrone Mings didn't make it. Mark Gahey not selected, and Fiacco Tomori not selected. However, Ben White, the one possible candidate there, did make it, and the other 3 also made it. Harry Maguire, John Stones, and Connor Cody all being selected. But we do have a new candidate coming in, and I gotta say, I kind of felt we made a mistake at first missing him in the main podcast, because we didn't mention him, and it's Eric Dyer. Yeah, selected for the squad, and But it turns out he had been off the squad for quite a while. So we'll introduce him, his bio, because we didn't do that during the main podcast. He had returned after an 18-month absence in September 22 and started both of their remaining games in September.
Yeah, the long absence is surprising because he does have 47 caps coming since 2015, but yeah, none over that previous 18-month period. He's played for Tottenham in England since 2014, but actually started in the Sporting Lisbon Academy, so a bit of an unusual route for an English player.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of tournaments, he was a starter in the Euro 2016. In the World Cup 2008, though, he only started the B team games 3 and 7 there, and then not selected for the Euro 2020. Even for the preliminary squad, the 33-man preliminary squad for Euro 2020. So I hadn't actually marked his absence in my mind, but now that he's back, I'm kind of alerted to him. Okay, let's take a look at the position. Harry Maguire and John Stones during and since the 2021 Euro Cup were the main starters. Mings and Guehi got starts but didn't seem to be posing a challenge. And actually the right defender, Kyle Walker, was the third, the right-sided central defender when it was a 3-man central defense. But as we saw, Dyer returned from a long absence in September to start both of those Nations League games. It'll be interesting when we get to the discussion of starters, whether we put Dyer among them. But let's move on to left backs here. And who do we have?
Yeah, so a few candidates at left back. We had two possible candidates. That was Luke Shaw of Man United and Ben Chilwell with Chelsea. And we had one possible but unlikely candidate in Tyrick Mitchell with Palace.
Right, and Tyrick Mitchell was not selected, so we'll delete him from the list here. And Luke Shaw did make the squad. However, Ben Chilwell didn't. He got a hamstring injury quite recently, actually, from early November, which put an end to his hope of being selected. His return date is unknown, but a hamstring injury, usually a longer term thing. So Ben Chilwell, we'll mark him in red as an injury.
Yeah, he's had an unfortunate amount of injuries in his career, especially since moving to Chelsea.
Yeah, and it looked like he had a pretty good chance. We only had him as a possible candidate, but I think he did have a good chance of making it. Okay, in terms of the position, and now this may be a left winger position when it's a 3-man defense, often the defender moving up to cover the wing. It was an unsettled position throughout the period from the Euro 2021 to June 2022, with several players stepping into the role, including the versatile defender Trippier and other out-of-position players. So uncertainty continued into the September Nations League games, where right-wing Saka moved over to play the left-wing position again, the 3-man defense. So, however, it was back to a bit more normalcy with Shaw playing in the second game. So there we have it, and we move on to the right-back position.
Yeah, this is a crowded territory for England, but we'll talk about some of the names. So we had as a definite candidate Chelsea's Reece James. We had as likely Kyle Walker with Man City and Liverpool's Trent Alexander-Arnold. And then we also had two possible but unlikely candidates in Leicester's James Justin and Southampton's Kyle Walker-Peters.
Right, and those two you just mentioned, we can delete from the list. James Justin and Kyle Walker-Peters not selected. Reece James, however, got a knee injury in mid-October, which ended his hopes of reaching the Cup, and that'll keep him out of club action also until mid-December. So a big loss, I think, there. On the other hand, Kyle Walker and Alexander-Arnold were selected for the squad. Okay, Yeah, I'm tempted to talk about that, but let's move on. And we put one defender or one player into a general or versatile category. Actually, a general defender, even a midfielder. Kieran Trippier kind of plays all over the field. So nominally, he's a right winger, but I've seen him listed as a right defender also. And it doesn't really matter where he is, because he'll probably fill in a little bit here. Oh, sorry, Connor, you were supposed to introduce him.
No, that's all right. Yeah, Kieran Trippier, as you mentioned, he's kind of settled into a right wing back or right back position with Newcastle. But yeah, we've also seen him move through to the middle at times, especially in a three-man defense. But
yeah, I think in the last podcast I said he was a left defender for Newcastle, and I kind of view him that way. Am I wrong?
I think he's right defender. I think he's right-footed, but he might have played out of position, including for England, as we see. There's a long list of very capable right backs and a shorter list of left defenders. So maybe he's played out of position. In any case, we had him as likely to make the squad.
Right, and he did make the squad, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is playing on the left. As you say, a bit more need for players over there. Okay, well, that covers the defense. Let's move on to the midfield. No, I think I forgot to kind of summarize those positions. So let's talk about right back. I did do left back. So for right back, Walker has been the default choice for Southgate, but several players have been tried out, partly because Walker sometimes joined the three-man central defense, leaving the kind of the right wing position open for others to get starts. So that was more often Reece James, but Alexander and Trippier both had a turn. Reece James was obviously making a strong bid as a starter until he got injured. He had played left wing twice, and once when Walker was not playing central defense even. So there we go. I think it was Reece James in the September games before he got injured there. All right, let's move on to the midfield. And we typically do defensive and central midfielders together. So we'll go through the candidates and then talk about the position.
Yeah, so on the defensive midfield side, we have two likely candidates, West Ham's Declan Rice and also Man City's Calvin Phillips. And then kind of a central midfield, there's two other likely candidates to add to our list, Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden. And then a couple of possible candidates we had were James Ward-Prowse, Jordan Henderson, and Conor Gallagher. Okay,
well, let's see who made it. Sorry, I just lost my spot there. Yeah, Ward-Prowse, the possible candidate, did not make the squad. However, Jordan Henderson did. And Conor Gallagher also made the squad. And if we go to the likely candidates, we have Calvin Phillips and Declan Rice both making it. And we have Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden also both making it. So 6 of them there, although I should have said that I moved Phil Foden to the attacking midfielder position. So I'll just do that right here. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the position. In a 4-3-3, it's usually Rice as the central midfielder, and in a 4-2-1-3, it tends to be Rice and Phillip. And that was the case in the Euro Cup and World Cup qualifying. But Henderson sometimes got a start in World Cup qualifying. Bellingham was used twice as a defensive midfielder, and it was Bellingham and Rice for both of the September Nations League games. Calvin Phillips out injured at that time. And I'll just report on that injury here. He was out with a shoulder injury from early October to early November, but he did play for his club just recently on November 12th. Okay, are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, let's, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll just mention that we'll talk next about left midfielders.
All right, and you're going to take us through the candidates there?
Yeah, so left midfielders, this would kind of be in a more central position as opposed to like a winger, which we'll talk about shortly. Between the left and right, we only really identified one player who seems to be off the squad, and that was Jesse Lingard.
Yeah, the position only exists in a 4-3-3, so it's not used much. When it is used, Mount, and then increasingly Bellingham since the 2021 Euro Cup. But the position again was not used in the September Nations League games. And actually, that's going to be the story on the right side. We don't have any candidates there. And a variety of players filled the spot when they did use it, but it wasn't used in the September game. So we won't go into too much detail there. Just Lingard did get one start as a right midfielder, but yeah, they tend not to use it. So we are so I'll erase Jesse Lingard from the list because he didn't make it. And we'll move on to left wingers here.
All right. So in as a definite candidate, we had Chelsea's Raheem Sterling. Likely we had Man City's Jack Grealish, and possible we had Man United's Jadon Sancho.
Yes, and Jadon Sancho didn't make the squad. I think his club form wasn't that good. What do you think?
Yeah, club form not great, and also not even starting consistently. So, yeah, not a huge surprise there.
Yeah. On the other hand, Raheem Sterling and Jack Grealish both made the squad. And I'm actually going to change the title to left wingers and left attacking midfielders. And the reason for that is that when it's a left winger, it's often the defensive player moving up into that position, the three-man defense, and the right and left backs moving up into the midfield. So we're kind of considering the more attacking players here at the top of the field, maybe a left attacking midfielder or even a left forward. So Sterling is the main candidate for the position, with Mount increasingly used because Sterling sometimes switched flanks. Oddly, it was right winger Saka, as we said, playing left winger in the first of the September Nations League games, and then Sterling playing the left attacking midfielder in the other one.
And I guess to be fair to Jadon Sancho, neither Raheem Sterling or Jack Grealish are playing that well for their clubs either. However, Jadon Sancho has been less involved than the others since the Euro Cup.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay, yeah, we're not really judging the players, but going more on their participation. So let's move over to right wingers, or I might as well change that to anyway, I'll change it to right attacking midfielders too while you take us through the candidates.
Yeah, so the likely candidate we identified was Bukayo Saka with Arsenal. We also identified as possible Jared Bowen of West Ham.
Right. Well, Jared Bowen didn't make the squad. Again, maybe a form issue there. And we also technically had Kieran Trippier here, but we dealt with him as a versatile defender midfielder. Bukayo Saka, on the other hand, did make the squad. So as with the left side, usually it's a right back pushing up when it's a winger position. Saka is the main candidate, but Phil Foden sometimes plays there. And Sterling and Saka do sometimes switch sides. So actually it was Phil Foden starting both of the September Nations League games as the right attacking midfielder. Phil Foden we're going to talk about soon as an attacking midfielder, but in this case he was playing on the right. And actually, let's move on to attacking midfielders.
Yeah, so we did have Phil Foden as likely, as we also had Mason Mount. And then we had one player who identified as possible but unlikely, and that's Arsenal's Emil Smith-Rowe.
Right. I think yes. Okay. Well, Emil Smith-Rowe, in addition to being possible but unlikely, went in for groin surgery in early October and wouldn't be available until November 28th. But he was not that likely to make the squad anyway. So we delete him from the list. We do have Mason Mount in addition to Phil Foden making the final squad. But we also have a new candidate in James Maddison making the squad. So we didn't introduce him in the previous podcast, so we should do that here. In terms of sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, just I'll just mention, I guess, his club form, and then you can talk about recent form. So he's been with Leicester City since 2018. He actually was with Norwich City before that, and then emerged through the Coventry youth system.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he last appeared for the national team on the bench in November 2019, so hasn't been on the squad quite a while. But his form is quite good in his club play, so he earned a spot. Just named to the final squad, though, wasn't part of the September games or anything, and has never been involved in a tournament for England before.
Yeah, in fact, just has one England cap to his name.
Yeah, oh wow. Okay, let's move on to the forwards. No, actually, I'll just talk a little bit about the attacking midfielder position. So in terms of the central attacking midfielder position, it's not often used, but when it is, it's almost always Mason Mount who is there, but it wasn't used in the September Nations League games. Okay, now on to forwards.
Right. For forward, we have a kind of a lengthy list, but only one definite, and that was Harry Kane. We had a couple possible candidates in Tammy Abrahams and Ollie Watkins. And then we had a kind of a long list of players who seemed to be off the squad. That included Everton's Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Marcus Rashford, Danny Welbeck, Callum Wilson, and Patrick Bamford of Leeds.
Yeah, well, now because we watched the Premier League, it seems like some of these players are, far off the squad. So Patrick Bamford not selected, Danny Welbeck not selected, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin not chosen. Those seem to be off the squad anyway. But the two possible candidates also, Tammy Abraham and Ollie Watkins, not selected. But going back to those who seem to be off the squad, two of them were selected, Marcus Rashford and Callum Wilson, both making the squad. And also, of course, Harry Kane making the squad. So that's a bit of a surprise. Hey, Connor?
Yeah, people may be surprised to know that we had particularly Marcus Rashford as appears to be off the squad. But yeah, do you want to talk about him or his appearance history?
Yeah, not his whole appearance history, but he was a start. Yeah, well, he was in the Euro 2016, World Cup 2018, and Euro 2020. He was always kind of a substitute in those, but he last appeared in the Euro 2020, so that's why we had him as seemingly off the squad. But I agree with you. It's a bit of a surprise to think of him that way.
Yeah, and Callum Wilson, he last appeared for the national team on the bench in November 2019. But like James Maddison, he seems to have gotten the call based on good play with his club.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely seems to be, I mean, maybe we're recognizing it because we're more familiar with the Premier League, but it does seem to be a fairly big factor. And sometimes when I talk to, people from other countries, Morocco or Iran or something, who are more intimate with the players, they're kind of aware of how they're doing in their club play. So they'll say, oh, no, that guy has been, in poor form for the last year. So form does seem to play a fairly big role. All right, well, that finishes the list, and we're going to come back. And pick the starters from that list, but we'll just go over a couple of things that we've been doing, some statistics on the players. So we did statistics on all the players in the main podcast. Now we're going to focus on just these 26 players. And take it away, Connor.
Yeah, so the average age of the England squad is 26.5. And actually, England has not selected any players 33 or older. And have 4 players who are 22 or younger. So that alone suggests it's a bit more youth than experience, certainly compared to some other teams.
Yeah, I mean, we're revising our position on what the average age is. I think we used to think 25 to 27. So, above 26 was a bit old, but it's proving different. They're the only team so far that I've seen that have no players 33 or older, and it's looking like 26.5 is actually pretty young as an average age of the squad. Can you tell us who the oldest and youngest are?
Yeah, the oldest players at 32 are Kyle Walker, Kieran Trippier, and Jordan Henderson, and the youngest is just 19-year-old Jude Bellingham.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, the two of the younger ones, Phil Foden and Bukayo Saka, are pretty integrated into the squad. On a lot of other teams, we see the younger players are just kind of coming into the squad. So the youth of England doing quite well getting into the squad, hey?
Yeah.
All right, let's look at whether that youthfulness means they have fewer caps than others.
Yeah, the average caps of those 26 players is just 13.5.
No, I'm sorry, Connor. That's a mistake in my data there. It's actually should be 38.
Okay, it seemed a little low, but there we go, 38.
And in comparison with others, the average that we have is 36. So actually, despite being a little bit younger, no, sorry, Connor, I'm mistaken again. It's 31.5.
Okay.
13.5 was a mistype. So actually, the average is 36, as I said. So the youthfulness is kind of does kind of come along with a bit of a lack of experience. We've done 8 teams so far for the statistics on this, and they are the second lowest there. But I'm not sure it matters that much. Okay, let's take a look at total goals. The numbers themselves don't mean that much. 118 total goals, and that we kind of run a little statistic that works out to 14.4%. And what that is total goals per cap. So it kind of gives us an impression of how they are as a scoring team, but really it's only understandable in terms of comparison with other teams. So the average is 12.9. So they're a bit above average in terms of scoring. But Brazil, for example, is 16.9. So they're not among the top scorers. Maybe you can give us a little info on who's getting their goals.
Yeah, so Harry Kane, as might be expected, is their leading goal scorer. He's got 51 goals across 75 caps. So personally, that's a 68% ratio. He's scoring in 68% of his games.
That's 2 out of 3 games. That's an absolutely stunning ratio.
Yeah.
It may be one of the highest in the world, actually.
Yeah, amazing. And then it drops off considerably. Raheem Sterling, Marcus Rashford, actually even Callum Wilson, though, just from 4 caps, they all sit around the 25% mark. So Harry Kane far and away, again, 68%.
Yeah, 25% is a reasonable, like a fairly good scoring rate, 1 goal every 4 games. It's not stunning. Bukayo Saka is at 20%. So really, to me, this suggests they are a bit reliant on Harry Kane. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they do have lots of players who can score, and they'll rely on that. But yeah, Harry Kane far and away, is the player that they're going to be getting their goals from.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we won't dwell on that too much. We're going to finish with a bunch of summaries. And so we'll tell you what the titles are, and then mostly just give the names because we've covered the details in the podcast. We begin with notable non-selections.
And we actually don't have any. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But
yeah, I mean, we should have said this for Eric Dyer in the previous podcast. That's the only one I can really think of.
Yeah, but yeah, in terms of non-selection, I mean, based on our list of particularly definite and likely candidates, other than a couple injuries, which we'll talk about too, no real surprises. Nobody left out that we are kind of shocked by.
Yeah, and not even any kind of big retiring players that I can think of that are a big loss.
Yeah, I think there's a fairly high degree of consistency from Euro 2020. And I think with Southgate, we've seen that he's loyal to his players. He's not going to just pick who's in form or not. I mean, it plays a part, but some players that we mentioned are not particularly in form, including Harry Maguire or Raheem Sterling. But they've done well for him in the past, so we've seen that Southgate tends to stick with him, and that may contribute to the lack of really no notable non-selections, not leaving people out that have been part of the team kind of in the lead up to this tournament.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to say, and I think that kind of explains. There's a bit of a hullabaloo in England about Ivan Toney not being selected, but I think you're right. It's Gareth Southgate conservatism. He's just not going to jump on a player who's hot. I mean, actually contradicting a little bit of what we've said in this podcast. But any comments on the Ivan Toney non-selection?
Again, if he was choosing Toney, he'd be choosing a player that he hasn't really worked with for England much. And it's a bit of a risk versus some players that he's worked for it and knows a bit more. I think it comes down a little bit to style. But they had a lot of forwards, but I don't think Gareth Southgate sees the World Cup as the opportunity to try out players. I think that will be reserved for Nations League and friendlies.
Yeah, good point. I wasn't personally surprised that he didn't choose Toney. I like Toney and I think he's good, but as you say, it's kind of a bit of the shiny object phenomenon to choose him, and Gareth Southgate doesn't really do that.
Yeah, I was a little more surprised with Tammy Abraham, to be honest. But England, they often have one player, one striker, sometimes supported by wingers. So they don't use a ton of forwards, and we know that Kane is going to be the starter. So,
do you mean you were surprised he wasn't selected?
Just a little bit. We had listed him as possible.
Well, you can't help see a general theme of him not really choosing the overseas players. I mean, we don't really know if he gave them due consideration, but Fikayo Tomori, is it Edwards on Sporting Lisbon, Tammy Abraham, they didn't really seem to be in the conversation that much.
Yeah. But
anyway, we'd better move on to surprise inclusions.
Yes, and we'll do that. And the two names that we mentioned were Marcus Rashford and Callum Wilson, both of who we kind of identified as seemingly off the squad.
Yeah, and that's really our basis for saying they're surprise inclusions. Marcus Rashford, in the grand scheme of things, not really a surprise, but because we had him as seemingly off the squad, that's why we put him here. Let's look at the new candidates.
Yeah,
so the new players.
There's two. So the first is Eric Dyer, who's new in the sense that he had an absence, but he actually has a long history with England, with the England team. And then one kind of genuinely new player, and that's James Maddison.
Yeah, and really our basis here is that they were new to us because we kind of hadn't covered them in the previous podcast because they didn't seem to be in the picture. So, okay, let's go update on injury. And we've divided this into smaller categories, beginning with those who have recovered from an injury. Maybe we mentioned them as an injury question in the previous podcast.
Yeah, so in recovered is Calvin Phillips. He's very recently recovered from his injury, but he did play for his club on November 12th.
Yeah, okay, and he's the only candidate there. Next one is an injury doubt, but nevertheless remains on the roster.
Yeah, and for that we have Kyle Walker. Kind of a groin injury had kept him out from early October until now, so he kind of doesn't have a known return date, but he was selected nonetheless. So presumably Southgate expects him to be fit.
Yeah, exactly. Southgate knew when making the selection. Okay, well, we have a couple of players dropped due to injury.
Yeah, two Chelsea fullbacks, Reece James and Ben Chilwell.
Right, and we had Reece James as a definite. Chilwell we only had as a possible, but I think it was maybe a little bit higher than that. So both of these a big loss to Southgate. And finally, we have players who were injured, but were not really strong candidates anyway.
Yeah, and for that we just have Emil Smith Rowe.
Right. Okay. Well, now we get to the part of the podcast where we predict the starters. So I have to magically populate the lists. And there it is. It's populated. So just like magic. And how about you take us through the candidates and I will talk about our previous predictions and whether we're sticking with them.
Yeah, so of course we have Gareth Southgate as manager. We expect him to remain.
No need to talk about that one.
And then for goalkeepers, we have Jordan Pickford, Nick Pope, and Aaron Ramsdale.
Right, and we had nominated Pickford as a starter in the previous podcast, but the recent challenges by Ramsdale and Pope puts that in doubt. Both of them and their teams are in good form, while Pickford team at least, not so much Pickford himself, but is at a low point in form. So for me, it could be any of them. I'm tempted to put them all in yellow. How about you, Connor?
I think Pickford was injured actually for the last couple games when Pope started. I do think Gareth Southgate will go back to Pickford. I know the other keepers are playing well and are on teams higher up the table, but I think he'll be loyal to Pickford, and I would expect Pickford to start.
Okay, well, I think I'll go along with that because, as you say, Gareth Southgate's conservatism leans me towards Pickford. And I also didn't realize he was injured during those last two games. So when I saw that Pope started them both, I was thinking, oh, a change of guard here. But yeah, I think at least he'll start Pickford. Maybe if he's not playing well, he'll go to the others maybe quickly. Do you think?
Yeah, possibly. But I think it would have to be pretty dramatic. I think we'll see Pickford for most of it, except for maybe a B team game if one arises.
Okay, well, we'll stick with Pickford then. Let's move on to the central defenders.
All right, so we have Harry Maguire, John Stones, Connor Cody, Ben White, and Eric Dyer.
Right, and we had nominated Maguire and Stones as a starter. Eric Dyer wasn't part of our discussion because he seemed to be off the squad. Now that Dyer is back, he could challenge for a position, even if it's a back two, and certainly if it's a back three. Maguire is out of form, and Ben White is in form, but again, Southgate's conservatism may well see him sticking with Maguire. What do you think before I say what I think?
Yeah, I think Southgate will go with the players who got him here, and that includes Harry Maguire. I think there's some chatter about that, but he's played well for England, so I'm going to stick with what we had: Maguire and Stones.
Okay, you're thinking a two-man back line, hey?
Yeah.
Okay, I actually was going to put a kind of a rotation of Maguire, Stones, and Eric Dyer. You don't see Eric Dyer as part of the equation now.
I just think his general lack of recent involvement means that I don't think Gareth Southgate will necessarily throw him right in. But I think it's possible to see him for sure, especially in a three-man back line.
Yeah. Okay, well, again, I'm tempted to agree with you because of Southgate's conservatism. So we'll nominate Maguire and Stones as the two starters, and it could be a three-man backline. In which who would you choose as the third for a three-man backline?
I think Gareth Southgate could choose Kyle Walker, but yeah, interesting. Ben White again doesn't have tons of recent experience, but he's been the man in form. So difficult to say, but possibly Dyer just on the fact that he has more caps.
Yeah, I was thinking Dyer until you mentioned Kyle Walker. Now that you do mention it, I think it's a pretty even bet between those two. Okay, let's move on to left backs. Well, we have Ben Chilwell, who's injured, so really we only have the one candidate here.
Yeah, Luke Shaw.
Luke Shaw. Well, I would argue maybe two candidates, because I think Kieran Trippier could play as the left back.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think he's more likely to be used on the right, but that is crowded. So, yeah, are you confident in nominating Shaw as the starter, or do you think there could be a bit more up in the air?
I don't know. I think Shaw's form hasn't been great. I wonder if he kind of came back from an injury as well. It seems to me like he's just kind of returned to playing with Manchester United. So I'm tempted to kind of put him and Trippier in yellow here. I don't see an injury actually for him, but he didn't play much in August and September, and kind of started playing from the beginning of October. Let's go with yellow on this one. Or how confident are you in Shaw?
I'm fine with yellow. I think it will be Shaw, but yeah, it could be. We could see a couple different players.
Okay, I'm going to move Trippier up, and we'll go with yellow for the time being. Maybe yellow is a default if we disagree, unless we can persuade each other. All right, let's look at right back. James Reece. Reece James, not part of the conversation here because he's injured. So, who do we have?
We have Kyle Walker and Alexander Arnold.
Okay, and it seems like you want to put Trippier into this discussion too.
Yeah, I think so, especially given that Alexander Arnold, doesn't really seem to be favored. Kyle Walker's being injured, so I think we could see Kieran Trippier on the right at least to start.
I agree. I do think he's a candidate over there. I think Southgate likes Kyle Walker more because he's a more defensive-minded player. I actually don't think he really. I don't think Alexander Arnold's style sits well with him. Great going forward, but not reliable enough in defense. So, however, there is a chance that Kyle Walker plays as a central defender, and one of Alexander Arnold or Trippier plays as the winger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do agree though that that Southgate favors Kyle Walker, so I'd probably be happy to nominate him as a starter. As we did previously.
Yeah, would you nominate either Alexander Arnold or Trippier as a starter on the wing?
Possibly, yeah. I think if it's a 5, 3 at the back and 2 wing backs, then I think Trippier will start somewhere.
Yeah, I think so too. I'd be more likely to nominate Trippier, but we already have him in yellow, which kind of indicates a possible starter there. I think Alexander Arnold is a possible starter too, but I'm not confident enough to actually highlight it. Should we move on?
Yeah, we'll talk about defensive and central midfielders.
Right.
And the names we have there are Declan Rice, Calvin Phillips, Jude Bellingham, Jordan Henderson, and Conor Gallagher. All
right, and let me see what we did last time. We had nominated Rice as a definite starter. And Southgate's conservatism again suggests he would go with Phillips if he is match fit. He is recovered from his injury, though he may lack match fitness. So my temptation would be to go green on Declan Rice as a definite, and yellow on Calvin Phillips as a possible starter. And maybe even yellow on Jude Bellingham. What do you think?
Yeah, I think on form and fitness, it could be Jude Bellingham. So I agree with you. I think Rice will definitely start and would put him green. And I would think Calvin Phillips and Jude Bellingham are both possible starters.
Okay, that's pretty much where I land as well. Okay, we move all the way to left wingers and left attacking midfielders. And take us through the candidates.
Yeah, here we have Raheem Sterling and Jack Grealish.
All right. Any started? Well, let me just say what we talked about last time. So, Sterling sometimes does switch to the right side of the field. So, I think we're going to see him as a starter somewhere on the field, not necessarily in this position.
Yeah, I agree.
How about Jack Grealish?
Yeah, I don't really see him starting, certainly ahead of Sterling.
Yeah. Okay, so Sterling as a definite, and Jack Grealish. I guess that pretty much says we think of him as a substitute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how about right wingers?
Well, we only really have one on the right wing, though other players can play it, and that's Bukayo Saka.
Yeah, we do have sometimes Raheem Sterling moving over. So, like Sterling, Saka does. Actually, Sterling and Saka don't always start, but they do seem the main players in these positions. Foden, though, is a bit of a challenge to both of them. And so we'll add him to this discussion, even though we have him as an attacking midfielder. Bukayo Saka or Foden?
I would go with Saka in this case.
Yeah, me too. I think Southgate kind of preferred him in the Euro Cup there as the starter, even though Phil Foden, I thought, played well. Okay, we move on to attacking midfielders.
Yeah, so here we have Mason Mount, Phil Foden, who we've talked about, and newcomer James Maddison.
Okay, what we said before was Mount doesn't always start. So none of these guys, actually, even Sterling and Saka, don't always start, but we kind of put them as a really strong yellow. However, Mount is present on the left or in the middle enough that it would be a bit of a surprise to me if he didn't start. How about you?
Yeah, I think game one that we're likely to see Mason Mount. Again, not based on club form, but just based out of kind of loyalty and service to Southgate in the past.
Yeah. Would you see Foden as a sometimes starter?
Absolutely. I think Foden is versatile enough that he could kind of sub in for any of those three players that we've mentioned, Sterling, Saka, or Mount. So I think that he'll start some games for sure, and he will see some action.
Yeah, but not quite enough to put in green.
Not quite enough. I think the three names are who I think would be the three most likely.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So that would leave James Maddison as a substitute, which I think would be the case. And finally, we have forwards.
Yeah, Harry Kane, Marcus Rashford, and Callum Wilson. Who do you see there?
I gotta. I mean, obviously it's Kane, but I'm a bit concerned about the lack of backup there. Just two players.
Yeah, and perhaps starting two forwards doesn't really seem an option. I guess Sterling could play it, but I think as a starter, we know it's going to be Kane. As long as he's healthy, I think he'll be starting for sure.
Yeah, and if he's not healthy, a bit of a problem because we saw they're pretty reliant on him for goals. Okay, we're going to finish with closing thoughts, but rather than rediscuss everything that we did in the team podcast, which is where we did most of this discussion. That would be the group podcast, but the England team. We're just going to focus on one question, and that's it. Are you ready, Connor?
Yeah.
Does the selection that we've seen change our opinion about England's chances?
I don't think so. I think, Southgate basically brought who we thought he'd brought. If anything, perhaps it could decrease my thought about their chances just because so many of his reliable players aren't necessarily in form for their clubs. But I think with Southgate, he doesn't spring that many surprises, and he's built rather than just kind of a collection of players, he seemed to have built a team spirit with England. And I think he's continuing that. He's continuing with a lot of the players that were in the Euros. And I think he's trying to grow the team. So, yeah, for me, it's what we thought would happen. So, yeah, that's kind of no new changes for England.
Yeah. Well, my take on it is basically the same. I don't think it really changes my opinion about their chances. But one worry that I do have is that his conservatism may bring England back to the point they were. Really before Euro 2020, and that was in England where everybody seemed really nervous. Sometimes they seemed like deer in the headlights on the field, and as you say, like he'll probably use players that are not in good form. They had a bit more of a freewheeling spirit in the Euro 2020. I just kind of feel like that's gone.
Yeah, I do think with Southgate, he is trying to grow a project, and I guess we'll see whether that. I mean, they've achieved good things so far. Semifinals at the World Cup, and final at the Euro. So in some ways, there's really, other than winning it, there's nowhere to go but down. But I think we'll kind of see the continued evolution of England, and hopefully for them, at least as competitive as they have been in their last 2 tournaments.
Okay, maybe I'll throw in one question just to close then. Where do you see England finishing? And more specifically, what do you think they would be realistically satisfied with, or would be a realistic goal?
I mean, I think based on what they've done, I think they'll aim to get to the final. They'll want to improve on a semi-final appearance from the last World Cup. Really, I think if they got to the Final Four, they're doing quite well, and that may depend on who they play. I think they should be satisfied with the semifinal because I don't think they're a finished product yet. But like I said, they've set the bar high over the last tournament, so it may be not a lot of room for growth there, really.
Yeah. I'm just going to say quarterfinals losing in a penalty shootout.
Oh, the dreaded penalty shootout.
That's not what I hope for, but that is what kind of my guess. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this podcast. So keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates. So that'll actually be taken out of the main podcast and edited together rather than being a separate podcast. And if we do it, it'll come out in the first few days of the Cup. But it depends on whether we have time to do it. Personally, I would like to have that list to listen to just before going into a game.
All right. Well, meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check our show notes for links to our website and previous podcast series.
Okay. Well, we'll see you in our next podcast.
See you then.
Bye-bye.